I published my first book during the pandemic, but that wasn't the first book I tried to publish. I think I tried to publish 3 books before that, but it never panned out. So this was like the fourth project that actually, reached the finish line. When I came to the US, obviously the first thing that was just absolutely intoxicating was the freedom that I got.
Is it worth moving to the US as a student when there are so many other friendlier countries where you don't have this GC backlog, where it's not as difficult for immigrants to possibly pursue their careers and pay off their loans?
There were days when I would like curl up in my bed and think about what's happening. But for the most part, actually, when you're so clear of the fact that you're going to climb that mountain, you're not going to, get too demotivated about the fact that there is like a rock on the way. When it's all in your head, it's like this giant ball of mess. But when you start slowly like pulling at that thread and, taking it out of your head, I think at least your head is cleared. It's not inside your head anymore. A mentor is not going to be ready to mentor you unless you show them that you are ready. You've done things worth mentoring from now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Working Woman Podcast. And I am Priya, your host. And with us today, we have our wonderful, wonderful guest, Soundarya, with us. If you don't know Soundarya actually moved to the US as a student in 2017. She worked at Salesforce as a product manager for 2.5 years. She quit her high paying job and then secured her O1 visa. Now she helps other immigrants secure talent visas. She's published 2 books. She runs a thriving community of immigrants and help them live their best life. Soundarya, that is no small feat, and I can't wait to unpack it. But is there anything that I missed in our wonderful introduction of you?
Oh, no, I think you've covered all the basics. And I feel like um, I also taught a course on planning with Notion. It's kind of a digression from what I was doing, but I just wanted to experiment for 6 months. So that was back in 2021, 2022. But yeah, that's like a small baby of mine that I haven't talked about it that much since then.
Oh my gosh. So definitely, I think probably would love to like dig deeper into that a little bit more. But before that, Soundarya, talk to us a little bit about where you studied, where are you from in India? How did you decide to move to the US, or why did you decide to move to the US to pursue your master's? Talk to us a little bit about that.
I was born in a suburb north of Chennai called Patravakkam. It's in Tamil Nadu. And I spent about 13 years growing up there and then moved to mainland Chennai, which is where my family currently lives. I went to NIT Trichy for my college. And then immediately after I graduated, I moved to New York to pursue a master's in management sciences at Columbia University. So that's about the educational background. Um, what made me pursue a master's? I had the privilege of coming to the US even before came for my master's. In 2016, I got a summer scholarship. It's called the SN Bose Scholarship. It's given to, I think, 40 Indian students a year. So, fortunately, I got the scholarship to come spend a summer working at a research lab in the US, specifically at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Um, and I don't know if you've been there, but it's a beautiful city, especially in the summer because the weather is just perfect. So I was there for 3 months. I was actually working as an energy engineering researcher back then. That was my window into what life in America would look like, and I loved it. Of course, life in America is a lot more than that short window that I got to see. But that's what made me realize that I'm definitely coming back to the US for my grad school.
You touched upon a lot of interesting things. You studied engineering, I assume, probably if you were in NIT Trichy, chemical engineering. And I studied engineering too. And studying engineering in India, that generally, at least in my class, there were not as many women. Um, when we were studying engineering, I don't know much about NIT Trichy, so would love to hear a little bit more around what that composition was when you came to the US. How was it? What was your experience like? Was your family very supportive? Because I remember when I was trying to move to the US first, my family was very much like, I think you should get married before you try to move to a new country. So tell us a little bit about your background. You have siblings, your family, parents, and any other barriers you had to face while you were doing this as a woman.
Sure. I think you asked, a lot of micro questions in there. So first talking about um, class composition, I actually think because I was from chemical engineering, there was a good gender balance in chemical engineering, but that was definitely not true for the other majors. I remember for mechanical engineering there were 4 women and like 50 or 80 men in the class. Um, and many other classes also had a very uh, disproportionate number of men students to female students, male students to female students. Something else that's worth probably noting is that when I was at NIT, there was a curfew only for women students. So we had to get back to our hostels by 9 p.m. every weekday and by 9:30 p.m. every weekend. And if you violate this a few times, you would be put in front of the warden and you would have to answer to them, and they may even take away your ID card if you do this too many times. So I think when I came to the US, obviously the first thing that was just absolutely intoxicating was the freedom that I got. Wherein I still remember second day in the US, I was walking home from Columbia University at like 4 a.m. in the night after working. And I just I remember like actually journaling that moment. I still have that voice note somewhere where I talked about how I can't believe that this is what I've been missing out on for the last 21 years of my life, or at least the last 4 years of my life. That you can walk back at this time in the night, and it doesn't have to be something thrilling. Because at NIT we had a few night outs, but it was always a very thrilling experience of, oh, we're breaking rules and going out. But at Columbia it was almost like a mundane normal thing, and I realize all the things I've been missing out on at NIT much more clearly. So I just felt like that was worth mentioning there. Um, but yeah, my parents were very supportive. They've always, especially my dad, he's been a very big champion of me doing well academically and me pursuing education. So they knew for a while that I would go away for grad school. So I'm very happy that they were supportive.
Do you have siblings on there?
I do. I have an older brother who's 5.5 years older than me. His name is Arun. He lives in India, in Delhi right now, with his wife and kid. And yeah, he was also very, very supportive with whatever decisions I've taken in my life.
That's amazing to have a very supportive family. So that you moved here as an international student in 2017. And right now, moving here as a student, probably, and you go to a ton of these college tours, what would you say the difference is? And let me rephrase this question. Like the difference in student life when you moved here in 2017 to the difference in the student life now in the US? What would you say that looks like?
I feel I'd have a more accurate answer after a month because I'm going on a book tour in April to several universities. It's a free tour for students. But just knowing from secondhand experiences, I feel like obviously I graduated a year before the pandemic. I never experienced what remote learning would look like in college. We always just went in person to classes. Um, Based on what I hear from students, obviously the pandemic changed things in the form of it being very hybrid, the learning experience. But of course, it also affected the job market. So there is just this the weather of job market is very bad right now in terms of if you look at the total number of people hired or getting fired, especially getting laid off, it's more than before. And that can quickly trickle down and like penetrate people's minds. And I keep talking to students who tell me that they haven't found a job and they're very, very scared that they never will because of what's happening in the market right now. And I mean, I there's not much I can say there. It is a difficult time. At least I tell students that look, like, you cannot change that, but you can do like more things in your control. You can attend more events, more networking events. You can look at all of your immigration options. You can, even as simple as you can improve something on your LinkedIn profile. Like there's always something that you can do. Just don't keep reading news articles that say that Google laid off people, or Meta laid off people. That's not going to help you.
No, that is, I'm glad you touched on that because I'm just going to ask it straight, because there is definitely this question that keeps coming up at this point, that is it worth moving to the US as a student when there are so many other friendlier countries where we don't have this GC backlog, where it's not as difficult for immigrants to possibly pursue their careers and pay off their loans? Is it still worth moving to the US? And the reason I ask you this is you've kind of been on this journey pre COVID, post COVID, been here as a student, lived that experience, and then built a whole community. So, what would your take be, or what are the things someone should know if they are trying to go down this route?
I almost think that that's not even the most helpful question we could answer for students, because me saying yes or no honestly is not going to help a student that much. Was it worth coming to the US for me? 100,000%, I would say. It changed my life. And forget the even education I got, or the fact that I got to earn a lot of money at Salesforce. Just the exposure of the kind of ways in which my mind has opened up in the last 6.5 something years since I've come. There is no way I could have got that if I'd stayed back where I was in India. But I think the question that people should ask is not, is it worth coming? Because the recent study that published that in 2023, India sent about 130,000 plus students to come to the US and set the record of most number of students. So there are people coming. Millions of students are still coming every single year. Um, so clearly, the US still has its charm. Um, but I would rather ask the question of, knowing what I know about the US, am I ready to take on the challenge of moving to the US right now? Because yeah, it's things have changed. Maybe there's not as many jobs in the market as before. And yes, the immigration system that I can personally attest to is not easy, especially if you want to start a company of your own. Um, if you're looking to get a green card fast as an Indian, then I don't think that's possible. I mean, sorry, let me rephrase that. Getting the green card fast as an Indian is not possible. You can, of course, start a company. Um, there is still the EB1 pathway for you to get a green card that is much faster than the EB2 pathway. And we can talk more about that. But I just feel like I would rather tell students, here are the realities, but here are the pros of coming to the US, because you still get to go to one of the best universities in the world. You still get to be around incredibly intelligent people. But here are all the disclaimers. Are you ready to take on the challenge? If yes, what can you do to start preparing yourself even before you come? So I feel that that is the question we should be asking.
I love that. It's beautifully put, and I'm glad you brought it back to the experience. And we talk about it all the time on It's OKR as well, where it is important to take the time to understand who you are as a person and weigh the pros and cons. Yes, things have changed, but if you are the kind of person who's craving that exposure, who has the attitude that they will figure it out, probably it's still the right place to be. But if you are the person who are in a life stage where you are a little more comfortable, you figured it out in India, you've put in the work, and you don't want to restart again, then probably this might not be the right decision. So, like, you put it beautifully, that understand what you want and then go from there. Let's come back to you, Soundarya, specifically. So you moved here as a student in Colombia, and you had this high paying job, which I think is a dream that many immigrants come to this land for. Talk to us about how that was like, because you were in a tech role, you were a PM. There are not as many women PMs as well. Like, things have changed now, but possibly this is not a career where we see a lot of women. What that was like, what did you like about it, and then why did you end up leaving it eventually?
I remember there was a meeting at Salesforce where I was the only woman in the room of maybe 15 people. And I just remember that moment because in that moment, I realized, wow, okay, there's not a lot of women representation in this cybersecurity side of Salesforce. Specifically, I'm only talking about the cybersecurity wing because I was a product manager in that domain under the company. But I do think, Salesforce, I think they made a public announcement several years ago that they were going to clear up any gender gap in terms of pay. And I do think Mark Benioff, like, they did that. They spent several $1 million to bridge any gender inequity in terms of salary. So I don't think I had any discrimination in terms of my salary. Um, in terms of why I quit, you kind of said this in your question that it's a dream job for so many people, including me. Um, I also think as a student, you're kind of desperate by the end of graduation that you would probably take any job at that point because you have a loan that you have to pay back, or you have family that you're supporting, or you just want to prove something to yourself because you came all this way. You don't want to go back yet. So I got my job pretty later on, I would say, compared to other people, or my internship. I remember April 1st, 2018 is when I got the internship offer from Salesforce. And that converted to a full time offer by the end of my internship, which was great. I was very excited about this new job and this new city. I moved to Seattle for the job, um, had this new apartment, and everything was great, except I had more fun spending my time in the park and library, reading books and writing articles, than I ever did working as a product manager at Salesforce. Um, so I wrote a short book on my O1 visa journey. It's a free book that people can read. It's on curiousmaverick.com, which is my personal blog. There, I know I talk about how there is a high before the low. You feel a sense of high when you get a job. It's the first time you're earning money that you're seeing in your bank account. So it just feels amazing to go from like counting dollars for food to now having to never think about dollars anymore in terms of food. But then after a few weeks you realize that your day-to-day work, like you start to think about that more. Does that excite me? And in my case, I realized I don't think I was ever meant to work in a corporate job. Now I know that in a lot of certainty, but back then it was like an icky feeling that I would keep getting every few weeks and months that I don't really know what I'm doing here. I mean, I understand why I'm here logically because it's paying me money. I need to pay back my loan. I need a visa and so on. But from a does it feed my soul perspective, it wasn't really doing that. And so I aggressively paid back my education loan. Every dollar I had, I sent it back home, and I paid it by the end of the first year. So then I realized now I don't have debt. I can do whatever I want. So what am I doing here? And that's when immigration became something top of my mind. So yeah, I can talk more about this, but that's the short version.
I love it. You said a few things and it really intrigued me. You said you were in Seattle and you realized enjoyed spending time in parks and libraries. Um, and then you wrote a book. I would love to understand a little more about a woman who is passionate about that stuff. And how did you end up while you were reading and spending time at the park or doing things that you enjoy and still figuring it out, you chose to write a book? Like, what made you prompt? What made that decision happen, or how did you begin?
I the some context here is I have been writing since I was 16 years old in some form or another. I launched my first blog in 2014. Um, I wrote for several clubs in college in undergrad. I also wrote for the college's online newsletter. So I had some experience with writing. Yeah, I had a passion. Yeah, but I didn't enter writing because I was passionate about it. I began writing just because it was some way for me to learn a new topic. But I became very passionate after I've been doing it for several years. So when I came to Colombia and US, I began this series called Walking Left to Walking Right, 1,000 miles away. So it was a series for me to record my highs and lows at Columbia as a graduate student, the mistakes, the lessons, the good stuff, the bad stuff, everything. And so a lot of people resonated with that. And I got some very good feedback from other students and my peers who enjoyed reading the series. And so after I graduated from Columbia, I didn't want to stop writing. I still wanted some outlet to keep writing. And I think after you've written so much, you start to think, I want to write a book someday. So I published my first book during the pandemic, but that wasn't the first book I tried to publish. I think I tried to publish three books before that, but it never panned out. So this was like the fourth project that actually, reached the finish line. Um, Admitted was a very unexpected book. So I still remember December 2019. I wanted to start a new newsletter, and I thought, how can I get people to sign up for my newsletter? So I decided, let's write a few short guides on different topics, use that as like a lead magnet to give away to people who would sign up for my newsletter. And so I began to think of like five topics that I could write short guides on. One of them happened to be a guide on studying abroad. And so I remember reaching out to a junior of mine from NIT called Sai Kishore, asking if he would collaborate on that with me. So that's how it started, as a short guide to be written for giving away to people in exchange, for them to join my newsletter. But then we started writing it, and I kept writing and writing, and we just thought of new and new and new topics to add on to the book. We didn't want to stop writing. And at some point, the 10-page guide became 50 pages, and then 100, 150, 200, 300. And finally, the book became a 368-page book, nonfiction guide, which covers the end to end process to help someone study abroad. So, um, yeah, that was the story behind Admitted.
Uh, I want to tap into a couple of things. You said that you tried writing before three times, it didn't work out, and this time it did work out. Talk to me about how a woman, for example, say someone who's in their 20s, loves writing, similarly has written a bunch of things, has a dream of having their own book one day. What is it that they should start doing to get there, and get started? And you can talk through your lens, right? Like the way you did it was you continued writing in different forms, but I'm sure like now that you've written two successful books, you have a lot of learnings, times when you failed, and it did not work out, and times when it worked out successfully. So if I am someone who loves writing but I have no idea how to like get a book started, what should I be doing?
Well, I think I would first advise that young women to write, not for the sake of writing a book, but just write, because like any skill, you need practice. You know Trying to write a book if without ever writing is like walking into a gym and expecting yourself to pick up a 50-pound weight or dumbbell without ever having done that before. I just feel like we all write every single day. We write emails and progress reports and proposals. um, but I think it's a little different when you're trying to formulate a very amorphous thing in your mind and put that on paper for clarity, and that requires practice. And I say this to myself too. I haven't been writing outside of my business in the last 6 7 months since I published Unshackled, and I need training. When I'm going to start my next book, I need practice and training to do that for a while. So I would say, first, write short pieces. Like, pick a random topic, read about it, research about it, take notes as you're researching, and then try to write a short article on it and publish it out there and see what kind of feedback you get. Um, and more than anything, I feel like, see if you enjoy the process, because some people really don't like writing. It's not their cup of tea, and neither do they want it to be. And so I feel like, that's my first advice: is see if you enjoy the craft itself. And secondly, if you enjoy the craft, let's say you've done that for a few months, you want to write a book, Now, my advice is why? Why do you want to write this book so badly? And I think you need to have a lot of reasons to that question. So, a friend of mine once told me, gave me this good advice that it stuck with me since then. So, she told me that if you want to write a book, I think you should write down 5 reasons as to why you want to write that book. And the 5 reasons should be mutually exclusive from each other. Meaning, yeah, let's say that you, for example, Priya, you want to write a book on job search, helping international students find jobs. So, my question to you would be, why do you want to write that? And your responses could be number one, you could say, I went through an incredibly tough time finding a job, and this is my way of giving back to the community. Number two, you could say that I would like to make money, and I think this is a very timely topic to write a book on. So, those are two very different reasons to write, right? Number three could be you have already spent a year gathering all the resources necessary, and you don't think it's that much of an effort to publish a book. So, I feel like people need to write down at least three or ideally 5 reasons that are very different from each other as to why they want to do this, because only then they'll know that this makes sense from multiple perspectives to work on this project. It is not purely a financial motive, neither it is only an intellectual motive, that there are many reasons to do this. So that's an advice that stuck with me since I heard it.
Super actionable. I think it's beautiful that come up with 5 reasons that are mutually exclusive, and that just gives you so much clarity in terms of how you would progress, because you can get stuck with just the intellectual aspect or just the money aspect. But when you have multiple dimensions to work through, there is so much more flair you can add to that journey. So um, I love that. Talk to me about the publishing journey. So, for example, me, I watch this, I listen to this, and I get on this journey and I write this book. Now, how do I publish? What are the steps that one should take? And you are a fairly young woman who's trying to do a lot of things and build this network. Do you face any challenges when you were trying to like publish a book, go out, make these outreaches? Like, what was that journey like?
Yeah, I self-published both of my books. So not because I didn't want to go through a publisher. I did actually. For the first book I tried, I reached out to a bunch of publishers in India. Some of them never responded. Some got back and said no. And I think one or two said, it's going to take a 5-month process for us to review your manuscript. And I was too impatient. I decided, well, it's not like I'm trying to make money from this right now. So I just want to publish this out there. So I'll do it myself. Um, the second book was different. With Unshackled, from the get go, I knew it was going to be a book. It wasn't a short guide that I was going to write. And I knew I wanted to publish this under my company's umbrella, which is also the company through which I got my O1 visa eventually. And so I never tried to go through a publisher this time. Um, but I just want to say to anyone who's out there trying to self publish, be ready to take this upon as a full-time job. There is no other way. Like, you can manage the number of things that comes along with self-publishing a book. Like, I had to handle international logistics and import and export, like making sure that my thousands of books get shipped from India to the US port safely and go from there to a warehouse and warehouse to everyone's houses. And there is no words that I can use to describe how time consuming and intensive this process was, and very exhausting as well. Like, making all these calls, making sure that everybody who pre-ordered gets their book, and then someone might be like, oh, I changed my address, so can you ship it here instead? And now you have to return that book and ship it again. And I was mostly doing this by myself. So I think that that's just one aspect of the whole self-publishing journey, and I've been wanting to write a short guide on self publishing for a while. I just cannot find the time to do it right now. But I really want to do that because I actually lost $1,500 because I didn't know one small detail about how imports and export worked in doing international logistics. Um, but yeah, I would say that don't take self publishing lightly, especially if you want to do a good job at it. Like if you're expecting several thousand orders to come in, and if you want to satisfy them, it's not as simple as hitting publish on Amazon and expecting everything will be fine after that.
Love it, and I know you. I'm pretty sure you. If you've thought of writing a book, you will write a book about it, and we will talk about it again. But um, k- and you spoke about a couple of things, but I do want to just bring it into perspective a little bit. If someone is going on a self-publishing journey, what are the five things they should know if they are
Absolutely.
planning to self-publish their own book?
Five things you should know. Okay. Um, Number one, get a really good editor for your book. Um, I got an editor who's a professional editor who spent 30 years in the craft. I'd never thought editing was that important until I saw how Anayak, my editor, took the manuscript that I gave her and then gave me back this beautifully crafted professional guide on high skilled immigration. So get a really good editor. Do not try to save money on that. Number two would be understand international import and export logistics. If you're going to especially be doing that, um, I do think you can save a lot of money if you print the books in India or another country where it's cheaper and then move it to another country. But that comes with a lot of disclaimers like you having to manage everything yourself. So make sure you find a good like production printer in India who can talk directly to your warehouse in the US and they handle the whole thing. And I didn't do that properly. Number three would be make sure you have enough accountability systems set up because how are you going to push yourself to finish a book all by yourself? It's a very very hard thing because day one you have a lot of motivation, day two it keeps going up, day three, day four it only keeps peaking until one day something happens in your life and you've lost all motivation. And so I had public accountability because I had raised money from people. Now I had to deliver. I didn't have a choice. So I would say set up some sort of public slash private accountability systems to write. Number four would be I'm an excellent note taker, I would say. One of my core skills is that. Um, I used Rome Research. It's a software tool that's very good for note taking. I would recommend checking out something like Rome Research, if not that tool, for like good note taking as you're doing research. That's just a more of a personal preference. And last but not least, I actually think people should try to crowdfund more for books. I see a lot of crowdfunding campaigns out there for fictional novels, but I don't think there's very many for a non-fictional like educational guide like Unshackled. So it's a full-time job to raise money as well, but that'll give you public accountability if you raise money.
Love. I love how actionable these are. And I think just talking to you and anyone who's listening will at this point attest that there is so much thought clarity that you have and it comes across in all your answers.
Thank you.
I would love to talk a little bit more about how you got there. But before that, we have to talk about raising money and grants. You raised over 100,000 in crowdfunding and grants. So talk to us about how you ended up navigating that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that entire period feels like a marathon when I even think about it. But I had a call with someone called Brad Feld on August 21st, 2022. Brad Feld is the co founder of Techstars. He's a very big name in the startup community, VC community, and in the immigration community. He's been a vocal champion. So we had a call with him. And at some point in the call, Brad said, if you ever start a crowdfunding campaign, I would donate something to that cause. And so that's when I decided, okay, Brad said he'll donate, so I'm going to do this. Let's do it. And the next day, I got on a call with a marketing agency to help us with the crowdfunding campaign. And within the next 2 months, we set up the campaign and began working on it. So the overall campaign ran for about 30 days. We launched it on Kickstarter, which is a platform to launch these campaigns. Um, and we had a goal of raising the public goal we set was to raise $15,000. But to be very honest, the private goal I had was to raise $100,000. You always set a much lower threshold publicly because then you can cross it quickly. And then Kickstarter would promote your project on the website, which happened. We, I think, like crossed $15,000 within 3 days of the campaign. And then Kickstarter like promoted our project on their main page, and so on. So, well, we didn't end up raising $100,000 through the crowdfunding campaign only. I raised about 50,000 through the campaign, and that required so much effort, because I've never raised money in my life until then. And I think we tried like 10 different marketing techniques to get the word out there, to make sure that anyone who's a high skilled immigrant knows that this campaign is happening if they want to donate. Right? When I say donate, people weren't really donating, they were pre ordering a copy of the book, and they were pre-purchasing like a membership into the community, so they were going to get the value eventually. um, so yeah, we raised $50,000 from that, and a week after the campaign ended, I got a grant from Emergent Ventures Foundation for another $50,000, which was absolute dream come true. And there's a story behind that, but yeah, I can go into that if you want.
Yes, absolutely. Talk to us about that, and please talk to us about the fact that how how have you developed this kind of clarity? You're coming across as a person who knows this is what they want, and then just you go ahead and do it, right? Like, and please correct me if I am misreading reading that, but I can tell you, as a lot of women have this challenge of breaking through that. So were you always this person? What was your journey like to get there if you were not that person? And like, I think anyone who's listening would love to understand how you have built that attitude, that just having that accountability and moving things along.
Thanks so much for saying that. First of all, I don't often think of myself that way, but it's nice to hear that from you. I I've always had a very high bias towards action that I knew from when I was 18 years old. So, um, once one of my best friends told me that I'm like a dog with a bone. When I set my mind on a certain goal, I will figure out some way to like get there. So I think the same happened with Unshackled. We went public with Unshackled on August 9th, 2022. There was a lot of traction and momentum behind the project from the beginning. And it just felt like people were looking for this. There was nothing like this out there in the market. So once I decided that I'm going to publish the book, everything else was a, how do I say? Everything else was just a fun process to follow along the way. I mean, there were days when it wasn't so fun. There were days when I would like curl up in my bed and think about what's happening. But for the most part, actually, when you're so clear of the fact that you're going to climb that mountain, you're not going to, get too demotivated about the fact that there is like a rock on the way, or that this climb is too hard. I'm getting, I think that's what happened with Unshackled. But I do want to say one thing to anyone listening about grants, especially if you're a women founder, creator, impact, social impact person. I would say there are grants out there. Definitely go spend at least 10 hours searching for them. And I've actually published many LinkedIn posts sharing a list of grants for women founders and just founders in general. I spent probably 5 hours searching for whatever grants out there are there for this topic, because I knew immigration was a social impact project. I knew there has to be some foundation that cared about getting high skilled immigrants and helping them. And I applied for maybe three, four, or five plus grants. Um, Emergent Ventures didn't get back to me for a month after my first application. Like after I submitted, my friend told me they get back within a week if you're approved. They're very fast in that sense. But I didn't get back here from them for a month. But my mentor, Rajesh Sethi, told me that until they say no, it's not a no. Just keep sharing updates with them. Every week, share an update on what's happening with your campaign. So every week, I would send an email to them saying, "Here's how much we raised in the last week. Here's what happened. Here are the highlights." Eventually, after a month, they got back to me, set up an interview, And on the interview, um, by the end of the interview, they shared that they're giving me the grant. So I just want to say that don't discount grants. And until you hear it's a no, it is not a no. And keep sharing updates.
I love it. And Saundarya, you actually, your journey reminds me very much of my younger self. I think that is how I was as a person. And I have no problem sharing my age. I will turn 34 this year. But I have been this relentless person who wants to get something and just goes and gets it done. But you spoke about a couple of things here, right? Like, don't take that no unless you hear that as a no. You spoke about the fact that you were on this publishing journey and you wouldn't hear from people, or there were rejections, or there are times when you curled up in bed when things were not happening. How was that journey like, or what was that feeling like? Talk to us a little bit about the lows when you are navigating life as a
Yeah.
student. You're raising grants, you are figuring it out, like what is that like, and what motivates you to keep moving, and just still keeping that fire in you to be able to achieve your dreams.
I actually want to give a very like recent example, as recent as yesterday. Yesterday was a very hard day for me because a lot of crisis happened that I had to work on. And this is related to this book tour that we're organizing and that we've organized and launched for next month. So I have my journal in front of me in my laptop here. And yesterday at 3:28 p.m., this is what I wrote down in my journal. I wrote down feeling very low. A lot of crisis happened with the tour this week. And then I listed down the crisis that happened. I'm freaking out and I'm shutting down from all of this. I'm feeling very overwhelmed. This is causing more stress than I thought I could handle, and I'm not even sure I can handle this. I wish I could be home right now with my parents, away from all of this. So, yeah, I just want to say that I don't think that ever goes away. This was yesterday, like literally less than 24 hours ago, I was feeling this. And it was a very intense, like 10 minutes when I felt this the sense of, I don't think I can handle this. Um, and I wish I could be home, safely around my parents in India, eating good food and away from all of this. So I, I, I feel like my advice there, the only advice I can offer is to have some coping mechanisms.
What are
Um,
yours? How did you
yeah,
come out of it?
journaling helps. I think putting when it's all in your head, it's like this giant ball of mess. But when you start slowly like pulling at that thread and taking it out of your head, I think at least your head is cleared. It's not inside your head anymore. I highly, highly encourage people to journal more in general. I've been journaling for over 10 years now, so it's a very like core skill of mine. Secondly, I would say have someone that you can call. So fortunately, I have people in my life that I can call. My mentor Rajesh. When I say mentor, he's more like a parent to me, and we talk every single day. So um, he's kind of my rock and support system, and someone that I can call quickly when I go through these things. Very fortunate to have someone like that. So I'm sure everyone who's listening to this can build that person, even if they don't have that person right away. One person that you can, without thinking, call for that support during that time, because you cannot do this by yourself, and neither should you. You don't deserve to suffer alone. Or sorry, I mean, you shouldn't suffer alone. You deserve to have help.
Yes.
um that's my, I think, second thing. And thirdly, I realized it really helps to have like physical motion. Instead of sitting in one place, walking outside, going outside, and knowing that life is much much bigger than this one problem. There are people walking outside. There's people on the street who are living there. Like, I think going outside puts things in perspective more for all of us. And honestly, one more yesterday, what happened was I was feeling intensely stressed for 10-15 minutes, and then I saw this email from somebody sharing that they were now leaving a company that they were part of, and how they were going through a difficult time. And I was just thinking about how that put things in perspective for me. I was just thinking about like everyone's having a hard time in their own ways. And of course, we all know
Yeah,
that rationally, but we
forget
don't
that.
internalize that every single moment of the day. So that email made me realize that look, you're fine, you're alive, you're healthy, you're safe, you're not on the streets, like you're fine. This is just a small blip. You'll figure something out, and if anything, it's only going to make you stronger as a founder. So I gave myself a pep talk and got out of it.
Oh my gosh. I thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for people to understand that it's all not rosy of the five posts you see on social media. So I am glad you're sharing that. But Saundarya, as a young woman, has it ever been a challenge, like making outreaches or people not taking you seriously? Has that ever been a barrier? Because I come across this question all the time that I think people will not take me seriously because I'm very young. Have you ever faced that?
Yeah, absolutely. In like small instances, across my life, once I even remember my lawyer telling me, um, I got an O1 visa denied in 2022. I've shared about this publicly before. So when we got the denial notice and the RFE and so on, um, I remember my lawyer actually made a remark that I think the USCIS office is also a little ageist. That if they know that you're really young, they start doubting, how are you applying for this visa? It's meant for people at the top of their fields. Um, of course, I'm not making any like objective remark that that's why they denied it, but I just remember my lawyer making that like comment to me personally. Besides that, I think the tricky thing in answering that question, what you just asked, is you don't know if that's why they're rejecting you. Like, I've got a lot of no's, a lot of rejections in my life. I wish I knew why. I mean, I don't know if it was because I was from India, or because I was a woman, or because I'm young, or something else.
Do you process that when that rejection happens? How do you process that? Do you process why it's happening, or are you just like, it's fine, I'll find another opportunity? What kind of a person are you?
It depends on the degree of rejection. Like when I got the O1 visa denied, it- I was a pretty hard rejection to get versus me getting no from a potential sponsor for my book tour. It's still, rejection, but it's not the scale of the other one. But these days, honestly, I did so much sales and outreach the last 2 months to get sponsors for my upcoming Unshackled campus tour, and that it doesn't affect me as much anymore. And it's purely practice. It's practice combined with telling yourself that they're not saying no to you as a person. They're saying no to something that you proposed in this very moment of time, because for whatever reason from their side, it doesn't align with their priorities. So there needs to be some level of detachment, I think, which is so hard because if it's your project and your baby, it feels like someone saying no to your baby. And who wants to hear that?
I hear you. Honestly, when my first time I was moving to the US on an L1A, my visa was rejected for the reason that you're too young, because what I was 27, 26 when I was coming to the US, and they thought, oh, L1A for Google, no. So then I had to go through an individual application. So probably what you said is beautiful, that I don't know if I'm getting rejected because I'm a woman, I'm young, I'm from India. Who knows why that's happening? But it feels personal when it's that big of an issue. And after a point, you figure that out. Two more things I want to touch upon as we come to close this: mentorship. And you a lot of what you have spoken about, you've spoken about your mentor Rajesh in publicly, you've acknowledged him, you spoke about it here as well. How does one find a mentor in a foreign country? I come here, how do you find this one person? It's easy to say that find your one person. How did you do it?
Oh gosh, the number of times people have asked me this question, rightfully so. Um, and my answer is not going to be super helpful, but it's the truth. I never sought out Rajesh or Chuck or any of the other mentors that I've had. I never actively was like, I'm going to find a mentor today and then went out and found them. It was much more organic than that. Um, in fact, Rajesh once told me when I asked him, Rajesh, you mentor a lot of people. What would you answer to that question of how do you find mentors? And he said, you don't find mentors, you make yourself findable by mentors. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot to think about in that sentence, because the way I found Rajesh, or he found me, was I published my first book in India first, and then I wanted to republish that in the US through a publisher, and that publisher knew Rajesh. So his name is Joshua Levy. He was like, I think Rajesh can help you with marketing this book in the US. And that's how he connected me. So, in a way, if I hadn't published my book or put myself out there or reached out to this US publisher, I would not have met Rajesh. Similarly, my professor, like Professor Chuck Garcia from Columbia, who I also consider a mentor of mine, it wasn't that I asked him, would you be my mentor? Rather, after I graduated from Columbia, I once again published my first book, Admitted. And when I published that, he saw a LinkedIn post of that book, and he reached out to me and said, "Congrats! Would love to talk to you about this." And then we reconnected and began talking more. So my point is, a mentor is not going to be ready to mentor you unless you show them that you are ready. You've done things worth mentoring from now. And um, and I know that's like a catch 2022, right? You're like, but I need a mentor to tell me how to grow, but then I have to grow to find a mentor. What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has no, everyone has something to offer, and you, like you said, you have to spend some time understanding what has my journey been, and like seek and put yourself out there. Like right now, we live in a world of social media where there are so many mediums to just put yourself out there, and then probably be intentional with their outreaches. And it's easier said than done, but you kind of have to develop a little bit of thick skin when you don't hear back from someone, and not take it personally and just keep at it, and it will happen. I think that's the advice I give people. But I appreciate you just saying it the way it is, and not trying to make up things when when that's not your story. So I appreciate that. And to, like, I think to wrap up, it will be a huge miss if we don't talk about O1, because there is a huge myth in this world that O1 can only be gotten by Nobel Prize winners or artists or an actor. And here I am sitting with someone, talking to someone who got their O1, rejected once, did not give up, and now is an O1 recipient. So talk to us a little bit about that, and then close us with Unshackled, where people can find you, and just a little bit about your college tour.
Absolutely. The O1 is called an extraordinary visa. It is still only a visa, it's not a green card. um, it is like the H1B. It's a work visa that needs a sponsorship by an employer or an agent. So it has 8 criteria under it. USC has introduced the O1 back in 1990 along with the H1B because they wanted to create a visa that would attract top talent from across the world to come to America. And they didn't want to put a cap on it like the H1B. And so the O1 is uncapped, no lottery. You can, as many people can apply for that in a year and get it. But you have to satisfy 3 out of 8 criteria to get the visa.
Yep.
Um, Without going into too much detail, the criteria are things like getting press on your work, judging the work of others in your field, getting awards, and so on.
Similar to EB1A, I would say, like,
Very
right?
similar. EB1 has a higher bar because it's a
Yeah.
green card. I actually launched a free 5-day course kind of teaching people about talent visas. And they can find that on readunshackled.com/TVC for talent visa course.
And
So
I'll
they
leave
can
that
go
in
and
the
check that.
description as well.
Yeah. But you asked another question around, Unshackled. So we published this book called Unshackled, me and my co author Samir, who's a lawyer. And I just felt like we needed a community where we could build the whole ecosystem to help more immigrants get talent visas, like the O1, EB1A, and EB2 NIW specifically. And so, if anyone who's listening to this is interested in, really interested in wanting to get their talent visas to start a company, to get freedom, to quit their jobs, I do think you need some support system and guidance to go through that process. You would be going through it a lot faster if you had that. And so if you're interested, check out unshackled.club. And that's where you can go and essentially become a member of our community. And lastly, if you're a student listening to this, or even if you're not actually, we've launched this countrywide effort across 4 states, 8 cities in America, where I'm going to be going to speak to international graduate students and educate them on talent visas and more, um, right from their university days itself.
So that they
So
can
it's
build their profile. It's so important. I'm so glad you're doing this.
exactly, and it's a free tour. Thankfully, we have a bunch of wonderful sponsors on the back end. So it's a free tour for students. We are hoping to reach more than 3,000 people in person, and they can visit essentially tour.readandshackle.com and go and RSVP for one of the events. Wherever it says open to public, it's open to public, and you don't have to be a student. You can literally be anyone walking into the event and like get the free information and resources. So check tour.readandshackle.com.
That's amazing. And I will leave all these links in the description box so that you can
Thank you.
find that as well. Soundarya, last piece, just before we closed, like when your O1 got rejected in 2022, how did you build up the courage to start back again and do that? I think I need to ask that because I run a whole community. It's okay, I went through this journey. I have people who are constantly getting either rejected or figuring that out and are at this point where they don't know how to pick themselves up and start again. So talk to us about that before we close.
Um, I think it's a combination of what I mentioned before. I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. It was very hard, and I wanted to process that as well. But the third day, I think at some point everyone realizes that no point in wallowing in sorrow. Let's move on from this. Fortunately, I had people around me who could not just help emotionally, but also practically. So I had both. I had my mentor Rajesh, I had my lawyer Samir, I had my best friend Rishabh, and I had other people who everyone together kind of helped me work on the next steps back then. So people, just people, and having good people around.
That's amazing. And I think that's a great way to close it. Like, find your people, join the community, learn about the visa. And if you're early on in the process, take advantage of the resources. There are so many right now to build that profile. But thank you so much for joining us and being so open and transparent about your journey. Anyone who's watching, I'm sure, is going to learn a lot from this. And thanks to everyone who's listening to the Working Woman podcast. If you watched it so far, please like, share, and subscribe and leave a comment and let us know what kind of stories you'd like us to cover. Thank you, Soundarya. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks, Priya.